Starting off today, we are heading over to Bumblebee, Arizona. Bumblebee is officially one of the cutest sounding towns with one of the most disturbing stories. This story is one of love that ends in the most horrifying way. In late October 2003, the mysterious and chilling killing of Brandon Roomba and his girlfriend Lisa Gieri shook the quiet backdrop of Arizona's vast desert. The young couple had set out for a romantic camping trip armed with a new camera to capture the essence of their adventure under the starlit sky. Their destination was a secluded spot near Bumblebee Road, just north of Phoenix, where they planned to spend the weekend away from the bustling city life to celebrate their first anniversary. But what was meant to be a peaceful getaway turned sinister when they never returned. Days later, both Brandon and Lisa were found with their lives taken, still in their sleeping bags. Despite a flurry of investigative efforts, including a very mysterious photograph retrieved from their camera depicting what looked like an eerie nighttime scene, the case remains cold. The chilling question of who could have done this and why still haunts detectives to this day. Next on our list, we are heading over to Pinetop Lakeside. Pinetop Lakeside is a lovely little mountain town that hides an absolutely gruesome story from 2008. Chad Coker, a man with a very turbulent past marred by DV and substance abuse, committed a horrific crime that shattered the peace of this seemingly ordinary evening. It all began when William Edward Westover, freshly acquainted with Coker's ex-wife, ventured out on a first date that would tragically be his last. As the night progressed, Coker, fueled by jealousy and rage and probably some of those substances, tracked down the couple after they had cautiously avoided him earlier at a local spot. The nightmare escalated when Coker forcefully barged into his ex-wife's apartment late at night. With a cold determination, he attacked Westover with a ferocity that ended in a horrifying number of wounds. Amid the chaos, Coker's ex-wife, while desperately fighting for her own life and that of Westover, managed to call 911, a decision that likely spared her from a similar fate. Police arrived swiftly, only to find a scene straight out of a horror film. Coker was apprehended while clutching a weapon moments after committing the very dreadful act. Next, we are heading over to Vulture City. Vulture City is the kind of place where you start to wonder what those old buildings could say if they could talk, and some people swear they hear whispers anyway. Nestled in the rugged landscapes of Arizona, Vulture City whispers tales of its ruckus past, drawing the curious and the brave to its deserted streets. Founded during the feverish rush of the 1800s gold boom, this now abandoned town once thrummed with the dreams and greed of fortune seekers. At its peak, Vulture City buzzed with miners, but it wasn't just the glitter of gold that marked its history. It was also scarred by a dark underbelly of violence and lawlessness. Stories of killing and betrayal were as common as the dust on its streets. At the heart of the town stands a grim sentinel, the huge Ironwood Tree. Local legend claims that this tree served a chilling purpose as the town's hanging tree, where numerous outlaws allegedly swung from its gnarled branches, their lives cut short by frontier justice. Today, some say that the spirits of those ill-fated souls linger, manifesting as shadowy figures that roam near the tree at night. Next up today, we are talking about the Superstition Mountains and the lost Dutchmans gold mine. Imagine a legendary gold mine that people have risked their lives in pursuit of, and that is the lost Dutchmans gold mine. This place is nestled within the rugged expanse of the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, of course, which if you've been a viewer of this channel for a while, you will know all about. The Superstition Mountains are said to be one of the most cursed and strange locations in all of the United States. According to legend, this elusive mine was discovered by Jacob Waltz, a German immigrant in the 19th century who took the secret of its location to his grave. Known colloquially as the Dutchman, a nod to the American mispronunciation of Deutsch meaning German, Waltz's hidden treasure has sparked the imaginations of many. Over the years, the story of this fabled mine has been told and retold, outstripping even the famous tales of Captain Kidd's treasure and California's lost Peg Leg Mine in popularity. Every year, approximately 9,000 people are lured by the promise of gold, venturing into the wilderness to uncover its secrets. Tragically, this quest has not been without cost. In one of the more recent and somber chapters of this saga, Jesse Capon from Denver, obsessed with finding the mine, vanished in 2009 while searching in the Tonto National Forest. His remains were tragically recovered 3 years later in a remote crevice. The story of the lost Dutchman's mine, wrapped in danger and allure, continues to be a poignant reminder of the powerful draw of the unknown. Moving on today, we are heading over to Florence, Arizona. Florence looks like a lovely little town with some of the richest history in the entire county, but it holds the tale of a chilling crime with a horrifying backstory. Let's take it back to January 1984, when Robert Mormon was serving a 9-year-to-life sentence in Florence for kidnapping when an eerie twist of events unfolded during a 3-day furlough. His adoptive mother, Roberta, visited him staying at the quaint Blue Mist Motel. On Friday the 13th, a date synonymous with bad luck, Mormon purchased knives and food, setting a very sinister scene. His mother, supposedly ill, became the subject of whispered concerns among locals as Mormon weaved a web of deceit, claiming she had left the motel while her belongings suggested otherwise. As the day progressed, Mormon's desperate attempts to dispose of suspiciously described garbage bags raised alarms. The local pizza parlor owner, sensing something amiss, tipped off the police. Under the guise of concern, Mormon misled the authorities about his mother's whereabouts. Meanwhile, he sought help from a prison lieutenant to dispose of what he called dog bones, which alarmingly turned out to be human remains. The truth unraveled very quickly, leading to Mormon's arrest and a trial that peeled back the layers of a disturbed mind and a gruesome crime. Despite claims of a possible motive that drove him to violence, the jury found him guilty, unswayed by his insanity defense. On February 29, 2012, justice echoed through the halls of the prison as Mormon faced execution, closing a very dark chapter rooted in betrayal and a mother's tragic visit to a sleepy motel in Florence. Next up, we are talking about Phoenix, Arizona, more specifically Baseline Road. Okay, before you come at me, I know that Phoenix is not a small town, and I am not trying to pretend that it is, but when I heard about these horrifying crimes of this man known as the Baseline Killer, I truly had no choice but to tell you all about it. Mark Goudeau, known as the Baseline Killer, is a figure straight out of a grim crime thriller. Between August 2005 and June 2006, Phoenix was his chilling playground where he committed a horrifying series of crimes that included taking the lives of 9 people, as well as numerous other disgusting and disturbing crimes that I will spare you the details of. This period in Phoenix was marked by a cloud of fear and mystery as Goudeau operated under the radar, choosing his victims at random, which only added to the city's panic. His moniker came from the Baseline Road in Phoenix, where many of his early attacks occurred. What makes his spree particularly disturbing is the brazenness and brutality of his crimes, coupled with his ability to evade capture for almost a year. His arrest didn't just bring relief, it ended a very dark chapter in Phoenix's history, turning him from a mysterious figure into a notorious convict. Next on our list, we are heading over to Tombstone, Arizona. Tombstone just already sounds like a creepy place, and this place isn't just any old Wild West town, it's the poster child for cowboy showdowns and spooky tales. Established in 1879, this town quickly earned a reputation as the real deal frontier town, complete with saloon brawls, notorious outlaws, and the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral. But it's not just the bullets and bravado that keep people talking. Tombstone's also known for its very eerie encounters. Places like the Birdcage Theater, once a rollicking entertainment hub, now host a different kind of crowd. Ghostly figures of cowboys and saloon girls that some say never left. Mysterious voices, sudden chills, and phantom figures peering from old windows make it easy to believe that in Tombstone, some residents might have just stuck around forever. This blend of gritty history and unresolved mystery makes makes Tombstone a town too tough to die and possibly too spirited to ever be forgotten. Next up, we are heading over to Bisby. They say that beneath Bisby's streets, old mining tunnels twist and turn, and some believe that they lead not just to forgotten gold, but to something far darker and stranger. Like, say, the underworld. Back in its heyday, Bisby was a bustling mining town, vibrant with the clang of picks and the hustle of miners digging deep into the earth. Today, it stands as a relic of the past, but beneath its charming streets lies a sprawling labyrinth of old mine tunnels, a veritable underground city left over from its mining boom. The real intrigue, however, starts with the local legends that have seeped into the town's identity as much as the mines themselves. There are whispers among the locals about mysterious portals hidden within these tunnels, gateways that lead to another dimension, or even more thrillingly, to the underworld itself. Tales of strange disappearances and eerie, unexplained encounters beneath the surface lend an air of mystery that makes Bisby a place where history feels alive and the borders between the unknown and the known blur intriguingly. Next on our list, we are heading over to Goldfield Ghost Town. In Goldfield, it's not just the creaky old buildings and the dusty streets that give you chills. Whispers say the ghosts of gold-hungry miners still linger, their restless spirits echoing through the abandoned town. Taking it back in time, Goldfield was the epitome of a boom town, thriving with miners and merchants drawn by the lure of gold. However, like many such towns, its fortunes dwindled when the gold veins ran dry, leaving behind empty buildings and silent streets. But Goldfield did not stay silent for long. Reimagined as a tourist attraction, it offers a peek into a past filled with both prosperity and hardship. Wander through its recreated streets and you might feel the echoes of the past underfoot. Visitors report sightings and sensations that suggest the old residents, particularly a miner known as George, might still be hanging around, perhaps not ready to leave the excitement of the gold rush behind. Truly taking the meaning of ghost town to a whole new level with that one, George. Thanks so much. And finally on our list today, we are heading over to Jerome. Jerome, Arizona isn't just your run-of-the-mill ghost town. It's a place brimming with historical charm and eerie tales that attract the curious from far and wide. Back in its heyday, Jerome was a bustling hub for copper mining, thriving with energy and ambition. However, as the mines closed in the 1950s, the town's vibrant pulse slowed dramatically, leaving it teetering on the edge of becoming another forgotten relic of the American West. But Jerome refused to fade into oblivion. Instead, it reinvented itself, capitalizing on its spooky reputation to draw in tourists. The centerpiece of Jerome's ghostly allure is the Jerome Grand Hotel, once a hospital where thousands of miners were treated. It's crazy to turn an old hospital into a hotel, like you're just asking for ghosts. Today, it's reputed to be one of the most haunted buildings in the entire state, with guests reporting sightings of spectral patients roaming its halls, ghostly children playing tricks, and eerie, unexplained noises echoing through the night. The entire town, it seems, is a stage for the supernatural, with many of its buildings and businesses boasting their own chilling stories of the paranormal. This rich blend of history and mysterious occurrences make Jerome a uniquely captivating destination for those fascinated by the past and also the paranormal.
And we're starting off the list with the town of Holman in Wisconsin. This small village has a story about one of the wildest cryptids in the United States, the man-bat. Unfortunately, it's not Batman. This is a large, half-man, half-bat looking creature, far less friendly. Actually, there is a man-bat in the actual Batman. It's a bit more like that, the villain, the scary monster guy. So this story goes that on a September night in 2006, a father and son had a terrifying run-in with what they described as a man-bat while driving down Briggs Road at night. Traveling in their truck, the pair spotted a massive figure hurtling towards them in the darkness. The father swerved to try and avoid colliding with the thing, and the creature abruptly changed course, flying up into the sky with a piercing shriek. Now, immediately afterward, both men were overcome overwhelmed by this sudden and severe illness, forcing them to pull over and vomit. Now, some say that has something to do with the creature. I don't know, it was maybe emitting something into the air. I just think they saw something really wild and it was overwhelming. I'd probably be barfing after seeing something like that. A giant winged creature flying towards my car. I almost just died. They described the creature to authorities, saying it was 6 to 7 feet tall with leathery bat-like wings, clawed appendages, and glowing yellow eyes. Some speculate that this bat creature could somehow be linked to the infamous Mothman, or that it's potentially even just the same creature.
Next up, we've got Saxtown, more like Axtown, a small town located just outside of Millstadt in Illinois. In 1847, the town was comprised of mostly German immigrants, and on March 19th of that same year, one of them, Fritz Stelzeride, was killed. After responding to a knock on the front door of his farmhouse, he was struck down with an axe. The killer then entered the home and killed his father, his mother, his grandfather, and his siblings, all with the same weapon. The bodies were found by Stelzeride's neighbor, who got suspicious when he didn't see anyone working on the farm that day. He discovered the disheveled bodies with their throats gouged from end to end. No one knows who the killer was or what their motivation was for ending the lives of an entire family in such a gruesome way. One theory, however, is that the family had been hiding gold on the property, but this was never proved because the existence, or the absence, of the money was never proved. Another theory is that a family member did the killing so that they would become the sole heir to the inheritance, a theory backed by the fact that after the killings, the one remaining member of the family who had not been on the farm that day, as far as we know, fled the country and changed his name. But again, if someone is targeting Stelzerides, it's probably best not to be one, so his logic could come from somewhere else.
Moving on to Woodland Park in Teller County, Colorado. Now, we have a very unsettling and tragic case involving a young man named Joshua Maddox. So in 2008, a man named Chuck Murphy was demolishing his old wood cabin when he came across something incredibly disturbing. It was the remains of Joshua Maddox, a young man who had been missing for 7 years at that point. He'd been stuck in the chimney. Now, it's pretty obvious that he died in the chimney, but there's always been this mystery as to why he was in there in the first place. Joshua was last seen alive in May of 2008 when he left his family's home to take a walk, but he never returned. Joshua seemed to have vanished without a trace. Then, in 2015, he was found lodged in the chimney of the cabin. This was the last place anyone was expecting to find him, which is why he was found completely by accident. So now people were wondering what happened to him during those years that he was missing. Some think there may have been foul play involved, that someone had forced him into that chimney. Others think he'd just been maybe up on the roof of the cabin for whatever reason and then had an accident.
Next up, we have the mystery of the Belo Killings, which took place in Windsor, North Carolina in 1993, back when the town had a population of just 4,000 people. So small, yes. Mysterious, also yes. On June 6, a man armed with various weapons entered the local Belo grocery after hours. There were 6 employees in the building, all doing their closing duties when the man arrived, and using his handheld projectile weapon, he led them all into the meat cutting room in the back. He bound their hands with duct tape and then stacked the employees 2 by 2 before firing his weapons at all 6. He then grabbed a meat cleaver and used it to impale the bodies numerous times, again and again, until the blade actually broke off into one of the victims' backs. Super disgusting, but surprisingly, after the attack, one of the victims was able to break free and call the police. Even more surprising, 3 of the employees actually survived the attack as well. The surviving employees were able to give a description of the man to police, but neither could figure out who committed the heinous crime, why, and where they are now. But the police did say it was malicious and thought out. There's currently a $30,000 reward for any information that can lead to the arrest of the assailant, so if you know anything, give the Windsor, North Carolina police a call and leave a comment.
Next on the list is the Jameson family case. In October of 2009, Bobby Jameson, his wife Sherilyn, and their daughter Madison disappeared from their home in Oklahoma. They were last seen alive on their home surveillance system footage, making trips between their vehicle and their home, packing to leave, in what authorities described as this very odd, almost trance-like state. Their abandoned truck was discovered days later in Latimer County, Oklahoma, with their malnourished dog inside and important belongings like their ID cards, their wallets, phones, a GPS system, and a large stack of cash. The family had been considering purchasing a plot of land nearby at the time of their disappearance, but it wasn't until November of 2013 that the skeletal remains of 2 adults and their daughter were found by hunters in a remote area of Latimer County, less than 3 miles from where the truck was abandoned. The remains were confirmed to belong to the Jameson family. The exact cause of death couldn't be determined because of how advanced the decomposition was, so the case is still completely unsolved.
Next up, we have the mystery of the vanishing Iowa town of Urkhammer. In 1928, the town was small but thriving. It was well kept and growing. The grass was always mowed, the roads were always clean, and ever so often new buildings would pop up as well. Pretty normal town, right? Well, things started to get weird when an aerial photo taken of the town painted an almost opposite picture of what could be seen from the point of view of someone on the ground. The town looked abandoned and disheveled. The grass looked overgrown and unkempt. A weird photo is weird, but many people did their best to believe that the image was the result of a messed up camera lens or something of the sort. But then things got weirder. During a road trip, an American man had stopped to fill up his gas tank in the town, but when he drove away, he realized that his tank had never been filled up, and so he drove back to get the gas that he paid for. He ran out of gas before he could reach the town, but he could see it and it didn't look far, so he got out of his car and began walking and walking and walking. He never made it. No one knows what happened to the town. Some believe it chipped away bit by bit, and others claim that it vanished into thin air out of the blue one afternoon.
Alright, next we have the case of Jessica Chambers. This one is pretty distressing. So this happened in Cortland, Mississippi. It's still one of the most baffling cases in the state. Just after 8 p.m. on December 6th, 2014, the body of a burning woman was found next to her car, which was also on fire. It was Jessica Chambers. She was still alive and told first responders that a man named Eric, or Derek, had set her on fire. She was rushed to the hospital where she died the following morning from her burns. Now here are the events that led up to her being found. She spent the morning with friends before heading to her mother Lisa's house, where she took a nap. Later in the afternoon, she received a text message and left her mother's house, mentioning that she was going to grab something to eat and clean out her car. Around 5:30 p.m., Jessica was spotted at a gas station, approximately 1.5 miles from where her body would later be discovered. This was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Location data from her phone indicated that she'd traveled to nearby Batesville around 6 p.m. She returned to Cortland around 6:30 p.m. At about 6:45, she made a call to her mother, who noted that the call was unusually quiet. This was just 15 minutes before Jessica drove to the area where her body was found. At 7:30 p.m., she arrived at the location where, tragically, she lost her life about 30 minutes later. Nobody knew who this Eric or Derek could have been. Everyone with those names in the surrounding area was questioned, but they were all ruled out. The case is still a complete mystery.
Next up, we have the Grin Light, which can be found in Gurdon, Arkansas, or Arkansas if you're James. He'll never live that down, guys. The light appears floating over the town's railroad tracks. It's eerie, ominous, and it glows a bright bluish white and sometimes has a bit of an orange tint. While the light might sound like some kind of ghost story or urban legend, it's actually not. It's a real phenomenon that occurs on a regular basis and that has been witnessed by hundreds of people, and maybe you if you decide to go visit. But still, no one knows why this light appears. There have been, of course, speculative ghost stories. Some people believe that one day, many years ago, a worker was killed on the train tracks and lost his head, and the light is the worker trying to find it again. Others believe he was killed by a co-worker with either a hammer or railroad spike, and some people believe in a much more scientific explanation. Kind of. Underground quartz crystals in the area that are under constant stress cause an electric reaction that results in the glow. Is that true? We don't know. There's not really a lot of scientific evidence to back the scientific theory up. Quotations, of course. The light is always there, but it's only visible at night. Some people believe it to be swamp fog, but that also doesn't make sense. Whole lot of theories for this one, but no real answers. If you have a theory, why not add it to the already very long list down below?
Now we move on to Longview, Texas to discuss a mysterious entity that's said to lurk in the Gregg County Historical Museum. This eerie presence lurks on the second floor, where a century-old iron coffin holds a haunting secret. Larry Corrington, a member of the board of directors, has spent a long time volunteering at the museum and has experienced some pretty unsettling stuff. According to him, while he works downstairs, he sometimes hears this distinct sound of small footsteps echoing near the coffin upstairs, and he's not the only one who's heard them either. Other volunteers have also reported hearing these phantom footsteps. The origins of the iron coffin date back to the 1880s when it was discovered near downtown Longview. Inside the coffin were the remarkably preserved remains of a young girl. It's believed that she passed away while on vacation, and her family, unable to transport her body back home to West Texas, chose to lay her to rest in the iron coffin. Now, the girl's remains were reinterred at Greenwood Cemetery, but the coffin itself found its way to the Gregg County Historical Museum in 1980, where it's been ever since.
Next up, we've got the Well to Hell, located in the back of an old graveyard in Sabattus, Maine. In 1956, it is said that a local boy had been dared by his friends to descend into the well. The young men were in high spirits, making jokes as their friend began his descent into the well. Well, they lowered him down using a rope, but when he reached the bottom, his friends assumed he would call up or yank the rope to signal that he wished to be lifted back out, but there was nothing. Just silence and no sign of movement. Eventually the friends took initiative and dragged the boy back up from the well, but as he emerged from the darkness, he looked like a completely different person. His hair had gone white, his eyes appeared as though they had lost what was human about them. It was like he had aged and completely changed in a matter of minutes, and not only that, but he had gone mad. He was unable to respond when his friends asked him what happened in the well. After the incident, he was confined to a mental institution and he never spoke another word ever again, but he would occasionally scream in terror. What happened in the well that day, no one knows. No one's been able to figure it out, what goes on down there, but I think a pretty good theory is that it was, in fact, a well to hell.
We're starting things off with Miamisburg in Montgomery County, which has some pretty spooky spots, including an Arby's. All kinds of disturbing stuff is said to go on at this fast food joint. Employees closing up for the night alone have said they've heard laughter coming from the basement, only to find no one there. Some will also report having their hair pulled by some unseen force. There's also a ghostly man who sometimes is seen staring into the oven during opening or closing hours. Hillgrove Cemetery is probably the most well-renowned haunted hotspot in this town, though some visitors will say they see a young girl crying over a grave, but when approached, she'll just stare at you for a moment before vanishing into thin air. There's also the grave of a preacher's daughter who took her own life after being disowned by her family. A Bible was said to have sat on her grave, with stories of it appearing broken one instant, but then perfectly fine the next. Next up is East Liverpool, which is home to a couple haunted parks, a haunted cemetery, and of course, a haunted phone booth. As silly as a haunted phone booth might sound though, the story is actually pretty spooky. So apparently a young man was killed in the area and his ghost haunts the street that he died on. And some will say that on some nights, especially Saturdays during the month of March, passersby will hear ringing coming from the booth. And if you answer the phone, you might just hear a somber ghostly voice on the other end telling you to look across the street. And if you do, you just might see a headless young man waving before vanishing into the shadows. Now we move on to Sandusky, Ohio, which has a few notoriously haunted spots. One is the Sandusky County Historic Jail and Dungeon. This place, which was built in the 1840s, is no longer a jail or a dungeon, or I guess it technically is a dungeon and a jail, but it's just not operating as one. There are tours of the place though, and the staff and many people who visit claim to have experienced some pretty eerie stuff. Something that's said to happen every so often has to do with the courthouse security system. So sometimes at around 2 or 3 in the morning, the motion alarm just goes off, detecting someone or something outside the dungeon door. Whatever it is will then make its way up the steps to the first floor of the courthouse. Now I say whatever it is because when security cameras get checked, there's usually no one in the footage. But on rare nights, there is a shadowy figure with a brimmed hat seen spotted sitting on a bench outside the courthouse. The fire alarm has also been known to be pulled even when nobody's near it. Whatever spirits are haunting this place, they seem to really enjoy loud, obnoxious noises. And on top of all that, you also have your typical disembodied sounds like voices and footsteps when there's nobody else around. We're gonna stay in Sandusky for a bit though, and talk about Cedar Point. Cedar Point is one of the most popular amusement parks in the US, but it also has a bit of a dark side. When we think of haunted theme parks, it's usually the abandoned ones where we picture all the paranormal stuff going on, but Cedar Point is still very much open. It was built in 1870 though, so it's been around for a while, and any theme park that old has definitely had its fair share of horrific accidents. Get it? It was a fair share theme park. Alright, one of the most haunted attractions was the frontier town Carousel, which is no longer there, but people would often claim to catch a glimpse of a ghostly woman riding one of the horses. She's said to be the wife of the man who carved the horses on the carousel. He'd killed her after finding out that she was cheating on him with a jockey, so now her spirit is attached to the carousel, coming out at midnight to ride a fake horse every full moon, which she's probably not too plussed about. For a woman who really seemed to like being around horses, a wooden one probably just doesn't cut it. Not to mention that she's stuck in a pretty boring ride that was built by the dude who shot her to death. So there's also that. Next on the list we have the town of Worcester. You thought the haunted Arby's was intriguing? Try the haunted Pizza Hut in this town. Yeah, you can't even grab a slice of pizza in Ohio without something paranormal or weird happening. I'd love to do a road trip through Ohio visiting every haunted fast food restaurant actually. Could call it like Fast Frights Ohio tour or something. So this Pizza Hut is part of a big plaza that was all built over the grounds of a former insane asylum. So there could be some lingering spirits in the area, most of whom seem to really stick to the Pizza Hut. There's also a Taco Bell in the plaza, which some paranormal stuff is said to go on, but there's not as many stories about that place because there's probably like 5 people who goes to Taco Bell, especially when you have a Pizza Hut right there. I'm gonna get tons of comments now from like Taco Bell fans being like, Taco Bell's the best. I don't know. I just think it's kind of mediocre. Staff at the Pizza Hut, though, have seen figures vanish into the walls. One manager who was closing up for the night was startled to hear footsteps following her and then turned around to see nothing but a white mist hovering in the air. Marietta in Washington County. This town is probably most well known for Anchorage Mansion, which is said to be very haunted. It was built by Douglas Putnam for his wife Eliza in the 1800s, but it's said Eliza died shortly after moving in, and people claim to have seen her ghost wandering around or peeking out of windows. Later on, the mansion was turned into a nursing home, where residents also reported seeing Eliza's ghost. Some say there are secret tunnels under the mansion as well, maybe from the Underground Railroad, but nobody really knows if they're haunted as well, but it's Ohio, so I'm presuming they are. Marietta is also home to a haunted Comfort Inn, where the televisions are known to turn off and on by themselves, doors open and close on their own, and guests will occasionally wake up with the feeling of cold hands on their body, luckily to find that no one is there in the room with them. I'd rather have a ghost in my room than a chilly intruder. Again, in Washington County, we have the village of Fredericksburg, which is home to Robin Industries, which does custom molding for rubber and plastic components. It was formerly the Fredericksburg pottery site, which had a pretty dark past, and the building is rumored to be haunted by multiple spirits. There were 2 major tragic events at Fredericksburg pottery site, including 2 devastating fires and a fatal train accident that took the lives of 12 people. So employees at the site have reported some pretty eerie encounters, like feeling sudden cold spots. Now, I usually kind of roll my eyes when people say cold spots. It's like, alright, spot's cold, whatever. But these are extra strange because staff will report feeling them behind machinery that runs at extremely high temperatures. One story involves the ghost of a man blamed for the train derailment, who is said to show up in the mold room. In the shipping room, sightings of an older gentleman believed to be the former mayor who witnessed the tragic train accident have also been reported. Then there's the apparition of an elderly woman who's been seen swinging doors open and shutting off machinery. The stairwell leading to the office is said to be guarded also by a spirit, with one employee experiencing a strong stench and then a sudden gust of wind that nearly knocked her down the stairs. And unless someone was eating some bad burritos from Taco Bell that day, I think it might have been a ghost. So I know we've covered Dayton, Ohio already, but I didn't mention the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is said to be one of the most haunted spots in the state. It's even been featured on Ghost Hunters. One eerie story involves the ghost of a young Vietnamese boy believed to have perished in one of the museum's helicopters. Visitors have reported sightings of the boy wandering the museum grounds after dark. And of course, then they go up to talk to him, and he's not actually there. It's not just some kid who ran into the place. There's also a German World War II fighter plane said to be inhabited by the ghost of its pilot. Visitors claim to have seen the pilot waving from the plane's window. Seeing as it's the ghost of a German World War II fighter pilot, though, I'm not sure if what he's doing is actually a wave. The helicopter named Hopalong is said to be haunted by a pilot who met a tragic end, with staff reporting sightings of him desperately flipping switches in a futile attempt to escape. The Black Maria, known for its secret missions during the Vietnam War, is also said to be haunted by the spirits of soldiers who died on board. The Boxcar plane, famous for dropping the atomic bomb on Nagasaki, is also rumored to be haunted by a young boy who is said to dart past it during the night. Haunted inns, always a staple of small villages, and Granville in Licking County, Ohio, has one of its very own, the Buxton Inn. This place dates back all the way to 1812, so plenty of history with this place. Even Abraham Lincoln stayed here, and some of those who were escaping from the Underground Railroad stayed here at one time as well. So with all the people who have passed through the doors and slept under this roof, all the history surrounding the building, it probably comes as no shock that some energy is said to linger within the inn. Not only do you have the spirits of past guests who have long since passed, but even former deceased employees are said to have never fully left. Like one of the previous owners, Ethel Bonnie Houston, for example, who's become known as the Lady in Blue. Several guests have claimed to see a woman in a blue dress roaming the hallways, only to walk right through closed doors or just vanish into thin air altogether. Some have also smelt cigar smoke out of nowhere before spotting a man who also vanishes into thin air. This is said to be the ghost of the inn's founder, Major Buxton. And we're to finish things off with Loudenville in Ashland County. This place is known for its two supposedly haunted spots, one of which is a hotel, the other a park. First, there's Mohican State Park, which is said to be haunted for a couple different reasons. Mainly though, there used to be an asylum on the land in the 1800s, which might help explain some of the ghostly stuff going on. Witnesses have also reported seeing a mysterious light in the park for over 2 decades. Then there's Landell's Mohican Castle, which is actually a hotel, and a damn cool looking one too. Looks like something you'd see in Norway. It was built on the grounds of a former English/German church. The story goes that in the late 1800s, a dispute over language during worship services led to the church mysteriously burning down after the Germans decided to relocate their relatives' graves. Since the current owners acquired the property in 1991, a series of unexplained fires have just been plaguing the place, including the destruction of a book factory in 92 and an on-site restaurant in 2007. Some believe the land is just cursed, with guests reporting sightings of a girl in blue in the graveyard and hearing crying in the cemetery and pool building. People will also claim to see Civil War era soldiers in their rooms.
Starting off our list today, we have Natchitoches. I'm so sorry, I likely said that wrong, and I'm sure that there will be some other town names that I mispronounce later on, so just let me know kindly down in the comments how you would say them. Alright, I'm here to learn. Louisiana's oldest town, Natchitoches, is known for its stunning historic district and beautiful Cane River, but it also harbors a darker past. Among the most whispered about sites is the Magnolia Plantation, where some claim to hear the clanking of chains from the days of slavery and see ghostly figures in the fields at night. Another notable location is the haunted Bullard Mansion, where the apparition of a sorrowful woman is said to wander the rooms, mourning a tragic loss from centuries ago. Along the Cane River, river, locals and visitors have reported unexplained lights and shadowy figures, suggesting a lingering presence of those who once lived and died in this historic town. These tales only contribute to the town's reputation as a place where the past is never entirely at rest. Next up today we have Old Algiers. Just across the Mississippi River from the French Quarter, Old Algiers is one of the oldest parts of New Orleans and exudes a quaint yet mysterious charm. Its history of maritime disasters, battles, and yellow fever epidemics has given rise to numerous ghost stories. Legends tell of spirits from different eras wandering its locales, notably the haunted Algiers courthouse, where visitors often report eerie sensations and fleeting shadows that defy explanation. Similarly, at Algiers Point, the oldest part of the neighborhood, phantom footsteps and ghostly apparitions are not uncommon. Some believe these hauntings are the souls of those affected by the area's tumultuous events, unable to find peace, forever imprinting their presence on Old Algiers' historical canvas. Next up today we have Gretna. Gretna is situated on the west bank of the Mississippi River, and it is a small town with a historic district that seems to hold secrets of the past. Among its most eerily enchanting sights is the Gretna Green Blacksmith Shop, an establishment steeped in folklore and whispered tales. Legend has it that the spirits of blacksmiths and patrons from bygone eras continue to inhabit this place, their presence felt through disembodied clanks of metal and fleeting shadows, and it's said that these spectral figures are not just remnants of the past, but guardians of stories untold, making this shop a focal point for those intrigued by the paranormal and the town's mysterious history. Next up today we have St. Francisville. St. Francisville has definitely carved its niche in the realm of the paranormal with the infamous Myrtles Plantation, a place we have spoken about many times here on the channel, and it is often cited as one of America's most haunted homes. This grand estate is of course steeped in eerie legends and is said to be haunted by the spirits of former inhabitants who met tragic fates. Among the chilling tales are those of a young girl who appears in the windows, spectral voices that echo through the hallways at night, and inexplicable cold spots that move across rooms. Visitors and staff have reported encounters with apparitions and unexplained phenomena, only adding layers of intrigue and a lot of fear to the plantation's already dark history. Next up on our list today we have Metairie, a suburb of New Orleans, and this place has its share of ghost stories, especially in the older parts of the town. The cemetery there has very elaborate tombs and statues, and of course, it is said to be haunted. The cemetery's atmosphere, particularly at dusk, lends itself to the spine-chilling tales recounted by those who visit. Some speak of seeing ghostly apparitions or spectral lights weaving through the tombs, while others report the unsettling feeling of being watched or followed. The intricate mausoleums and ornate statues, some of which commemorate prominent figures from Louisiana's history, seem to hold their own secrets, contributing to the cemetery's mysterious aura. Legends suggest that the spirits of those interred within these grand vaults are restless, perhaps disturbed by the living or clinging to their earthly ties. Such stories have cemented the cemetery's reputation as not just a final resting place, but a locale where the past and the present, the tangible and the ethereal, eerily intersect. Next up today we have Chalmette. The Chalmette Battlefield and National Cemetery. These are the hallowed grounds where the pivotal Battle of New Orleans took place, and it holds a deep historical and supernatural resonance. The spectral encounters reported here are not just limited to visual apparitions, but many visitors claim to hear the distant clash of arms, the urgent drum beats, and the anguished cries of soldiers echoing through the turmoil of the 1815 battle. These auditory hauntings are particularly potent on foggy mornings or late evenings, creating an atmosphere that feels kind of suspended in time. Not only this, but the cemetery, final resting place for many soldiers, is said to have its own eerie ambiance. People have reported sudden temperature drops and even the feeling of being watched, suggesting that the spirits of those who fought and fell are still tethered to this place of memory and loss, especially around the anniversary of the battle. Next up today we have Jean Lafitte. Is it Jean or Jean? Let me know. This small town, named after the infamous pirate, is steeped in legends and lore, with many believing that Jean Lafitte's spirit still lingers. Locals and visitors whisper about ghostly pirates wandering the marshes, sometimes seen from the corner of the eye, vanishing when approached. The lore suggests that these ghosts are protectors of hidden treasures, still guarding their loot even in death. The dense fog that often blankets the area adds a kind of visual mystique, giving the town an almost ethereal quality at night. Amid this fog, mysterious lights are sometimes seen moving through the trees, described by some as the lanterns of Jean Lafitte's crew, searching for something lost, or perhaps signaling to lost souls. Next up today we have Tibido. With deep roots in the sugarcane industry, this town not only bears the scars of its tumultuous past, but also carries the weight of its ghostly legacies. The Tibido Massacre, an event of racial violence, is a very dark chapter in the town's history, and it is believed to have left an indelible mark on the area, with many claiming that the unrested souls of the victims still roam the town. The air seems thick with the echoes of the past, particularly at night when the boundaries between eras blur. Visitors and residents report chilling encounters with apparitions in period clothing, inexplicable sounds, and a pervasive sense of unease in certain areas. These phantoms are most often sighted near historic sites tied to the massacre, as well as along the shadowy banks of the bayous where the water whispers of old sorrows. Such tales only contribute to Tibido's reputation as a place where history lives on, not just in books and memories, but palpably in the very atmosphere. Moving on down today we have Frenier. Nestled near the mysterious waters of Lake Pontchartrain, this place carries a haunting legacy amplified by its tragic history of natural disasters and eerie local folklore. The town's past is marred by catastrophic hurricanes that have decimated the community, leading to tales of lost souls and restless spirits that linger in this devastated landscape. Only adding to its mystique, Frenier is shrouded in tales of voodoo practices and curses, believed by some to be intertwined with the town's misfortunes. The desolate ghost town ambiance is palpable, with abandoned structures and overgrown vegetation reinforcing this sense of abandonment and otherworldliness. Visitors and lovers of the paranormal are drawn to Frenier's secluded setting, where the whispering winds and lapping waters seem to echo with the troubled past and spectral residents. And finally on our list today we have Mandeville. Across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans, Mandeville has its own tales of the paranormal. Among the most talked about ghostly legends is the tale of the Mandeville lakefront, where apparitions are said to wander the shores, especially on foggy nights, which seems to be a bit of a theme among these Louisiana places. Some locals recount seeing figures that suddenly vanish, leaving only footprints in the sand or the sound of disembodied whispers behind them. In the heart of Mandeville, historic buildings stand, and it's within these structures that many of the town's paranormal stories find their roots. For instance, there are accounts of spectral figures seen gazing out of windows only to disappear when approached. Others have reported unexplained sounds like footsteps or muted conversations echoing through empty rooms or hallways. These occurrences have fueled a sense of intrigue and mystery, making Mandeville a place where the past seems to intersect with the present in the most eerie of ways.
Loveland is home to one of the strangest creatures said to stalk the state, the Loveland frog, but it's also home to a supposedly haunted castle. Loveland Castle was constructed by Harry Andrews. Very interesting man this guy was. He had a lot of interest in knights and medieval lore. Andrews was born in 1890. He worked as a medic during World War I. He then contracted meningitis during the war and was believed to be dead. His body was actually moved to the morgue, like he was done. But when his body was taken back to the hospital to be dissected, the doctors were like, hey, you know what, why not? Let's just see if we can get his heart beating again with adrenaline. Miraculously, it worked. Andrews, who'd now spent a whole bunch of time in Europe and then almost died, was now even more into medieval history and returned home with this newfound determination to build his very own castle. Eventually, he constructed Loveland Castle along the banks of the Little Miami River. Andrews then moved into the castle, where he lived until he died in 1981. Today, the castle is the headquarters for the Knights of the Golden Trail, an organization Andrew started, dedicated to upholding the principles of knighthood, but Harry Andrews' spirit is said to still roam the castle grounds. Objects will mysteriously disappear or move, and voices are heard echoing through the corridors. And as I said at the top, of course, Loveland's supernatural reputation doesn't end with this castle. One of the most famous legends is that of the Loveland frog, or frogs. There have been multiple large frog-like creatures spotted near the Little Miami River over the years. Next up, we have Ashtabula, which is said to be haunted by the spirits of a tragic train disaster. So on December 29, 1876, the Pacific Express No. 5 crossed the Ashtabula Bridge, but because of particularly cold weather and structural weaknesses, the bridge collapsed, sending the train plummeting into the icy river below, and in the end 98 people died. The scene must have been absolutely horrific, with rail cars crashing into each other and igniting in flame, and firefighters were unable to put out the flames, so people just cried out in pain and horror as they were consumed by fire, trapped in the wreckage. It was one of the worst rail accidents in US history, and the screams of those victims still haunt the area to this day. Some say you can occasionally hear them above the rush of the river. The Chestnut Grove Cemetery holds the remains of 19 of these victims, but their spirits are said to be very much active. Visitors to the cemetery have reported seeing ghostly apparitions. But along with the victims of the tragedy, there's also said to be the ghost of Charles Collins, one of the developers of the bridge. Witnesses claim to have seen his guilty spirit weeping at the sight of the tragedy or crying over people's graves. Some claim to see tiny lights even hovering below the new bridge where the old one once stood. Rogues Hollow near Doylestown, Ohio has its fair share of spooky tales as well. It's said that a mill worker died in a pretty gruesome manner, getting crushed by the mill wheel, and now his spirit is said to guard the area, keeping outsiders at bay. Then there's the eerie tale of the headless horse and the ghost oak tree. So at one time there was a large oak tree near Route 65, and one of its branches hung so low that riders on horseback had to duck as they passed under it. Well, one story goes that the branch was weighed down extra low with ice, and a poor horse just ran into it at top speed, lobbing off its head. From that point on, riders passing the area late at night would occasionally come across a devilish figure riding a ghostly headless horse. Next up, we have Oxford, Ohio, which has one of the coolest ghosts, a phantom motorcyclist. So the story goes that back in the 40s, there was this farmer's daughter. She was head over heels for this guy who was a bit of a James Dean type, leather jacket, motorcycle, very rebellious. Also a lot like me, minus the motorcycle, the leather jacket, and the rebellious part. His name was James, that's the similarity. And her father was not too thrilled about their relationship. He thought the guy was trouble, and he probably wasn't wrong. He forbade his daughter from seeing him, so to avoid her father's disapproval, they met up in complete secret, usually late at night when the coast was clear, and when it was, the girlfriend would flash the porch light 3 times as a signal for him to come over. Well, one night, the boyfriend decided he wanted to take their relationship to the next level and propose. He saw the 3 flashes and revved up his motorcycle, racing towards her house to pop the question, but as soon as he sped down the road, he lost control of his bike, crashing into a barbed wire fence. And ever since, people claim they've seen this mysterious light flickering in the distance along the road where he crashed, said to be the spirit of the phantom motorcyclist, still trying to reach his girl's house to ask for her hand in marriage. Next on the list is Chillicothe, where there were a series of mysterious disappearances between 2014 and 2015. Now, it all began in the spring of 2014 when Charlotte Trago vanished without a trace. Trago, who had struggled with addiction, was a mother of 2, and she remains missing to this day. Shortly after Trego's disappearance, another woman, Tamika Lynch, who was a friend of Trego's, went missing as well. Her body was discovered 3 weeks later by kayakers. It's pretty obvious there was foul play, but the official cause of her death was deemed inconclusive. Then there was the disappearance of Wanda Lemons in November of 2014. She's also never been found. On Christmas Day 2014, Shasta Hemmelrich went missing. Her body was later recovered from the Scioto River. Authorities claim she took her own life, but her family, as well as many others, think someone took it from her. Then there was the disappearance and discovery of Tiffany Sayers' body in May 2015. Her remains were found in a creek, covered by a sheet. And the final victim, Timberly Claytora's body, was found near an abandoned building. She died at the hands of a firearm. And the case just would have been handled completely differently if these women hadn't been battling addiction. That was the one thing connecting all these. They were all involved in that world. And there's just this kind of lax attitude when it comes to situations like this, unfortunately, where authorities are like, well, you know, they're part of that world. This is just what happens. So it really hasn't got the attention that it deserves. Now we move on to the town of Lancaster. Here, there used to be a home with an incredibly dark past, the Mudhouse Mansion. So the mansion's origins go back to the mid-19th century, when it was built as a grand estate for a wealthy family. But as time went on, the home fell into disrepair, and eventually it was abandoned and left to decay. And over the years, all these urban legends started to form around it. One of the most infamous stories is that the family had actually died in the mansion. Some versions of the tale claim that they were killed by an unknown assailant. Others go that they'd been driven to madness by some sinister force lurking within the mansion's walls. The Mudhouse Mansion was even said to be the birthplace of Bloody Mary herself. The mansion was demolished in 2015, but some folks will still claim to see ghostly figures of the mansion's former residents wandering the grounds, forever trapped in a limbo between the worlds of the living and the dead. Alright, one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in Ohio has to be the Circleville letters case. Now I'm going to paraphrase here because there's a lot of detail. We could probably do an entire video about this case alone, but I'll go over it. It all started in 1976. Residents of Circleville started receiving these unsettling, threatening letters containing all these intimate details of their personal lives. The letters were postmarked from Columbus, Ohio, but there was no return address. One of the receivers of these letters was Mary Gillespie, a bus driver. She was accused in one of these letters of having an affair with the school superintendent, and the letters just kept coming in from this unknown sender. Then, Mary's husband, Ron, also became a target. He received a chilling ultimatum to end his wife's supposed affair or face dire consequences: death. Ron was found dead in his pickup truck after a mysterious phone call which had seemingly confirmed his suspicion about the letter writer's identity. He'd left in his pickup truck with a firearm but was found dead soon after, having crashed into a tree. Now, authorities ruled Ron's death an accident, but then the letters continued. A number of residents received letters saying that Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe, who had investigated Ron's death, had been involved in a cover-up. At one point, this mysterious writer even planted threatening signs along Mary Gillespie's bus route, one of which she went to take down, only to find out it'd been booby-trapped. If Mary had pulled the sign down in a particular way, a small pistol would have fired at her. Now, one man was arrested, Paul Freshore, but it's never been 100% verified that he was behind these letters. Eventually, he got out on parole. Case is still a mystery to this day. In the Hills and Dales Metro Park in Kittering, Ohio, there's a structure with a very shadowy past, the Haunted Witch's Tower, also known as Frankenstein's Castle. It was completed in 1941, and this 30-foot tall tower was constructed by boys with the National Youth Administration using salvaged stone. Its purpose was to provide panoramic views of the community country club, with its lookout platform offering vistas stretching up to 15 miles. But because of how remote the tower is, a lot of young hooligans started flocking there in the 60s. Graffiti covered its walls, and bottles of liquor and beer cans littered the grounds. Even shingles torn from the roof and glass bottles became ammo for attacks on passing cars below on Peterson Boulevard. Then in 1967, during a thunderstorm, a young woman named Peggy Harmison sought shelter inside the tower with her boyfriend, Ronnie Stevens. Bad move. Lightning struck the tower, killing Peggy instantly. Her body was found on the 11th step, half covered in severe burns. Ronnie survived, but he was found in a state of uncontrollable shock, apparently running around screaming. And ever since that night, there have been stories about the ghost of Peggy haunting the tower. Alright, let's switch things up with a haunted golf club. You don't hear about haunted golf clubs very often. Legend has it that in the 60s, a bride fell from a balcony at Oakhurst Golf Club in Grove City, Ohio, and her ghost is said to haunt the establishment to this very day. One of the most frequently reported sightings involves the ghostly figure of a woman dressed in white, believed to be the ghost of the bride. The upstairs kitchen, located near the ballroom where events are held, is said to be a hotspot for paranormal activity. Employees have reported hearing unexplained sounds of pots and pans clanging and knocking late at night, only to discover that items have been mysteriously rearranged by morning. Alright, we're finishing things off today with Minerva. It all began in August of 1978 when the Caton family reported encountering a strange creature near their home. According to the Catons, they were enjoying a quiet evening when they heard unusual noises coming from outside. They came face to face with this towering ape-like creature standing over 7 feet tall. The creature reportedly had shaggy dark fur covering its body, it had glowing red eyes, and emitted this foul odor. The Catons quickly ran back to the safety of their home and phoned the cops. In the days that followed, all these other sightings of a mysterious creature were reported by other residents of Minerva. Witnesses described similar encounters with a large, hairy beast lurking in the shadows, but none of the stories were scarier than the Catons, who said the creature returned to their property several times, hurling rocks at their home, staring at them through their kitchen window, and even killing their dog. It's one of the most violent Bigfoot cases ever reported. We're going to start the list with Waynesville, Ohio. This is said to be one of the most haunted towns in the state, which is saying a lot for Ohio. Waynesville, Ohio is founded way back in 1797, and it has quite the history and its fair share of spooky stories. So sure, folks flock here for the antiques and the annual sauerkraut festival, but it's also known as a haunt for ghost hunters. You'll hear some odd sounds in the old buildings. You'll see shadowy figures peeking out of windows. With more than 15 spots rumored to be haunted, Waynesville has no shortage of creepy tales, like the Hamel House Inn, for example. Staff here have reported seeing a mysterious man in room 4, and some say a young salesman vanished there ages ago, possibly meeting a dark end. Then there's the Stetson House, where Louisa Stetson, Lyric, supposedly still roams, dressed to the nines in old-fashioned gear. There's also the former Friends boarding home, now a museum, where you might hear the sounds of ladies bustling about as if they're cooking up a storm, even though there's no kitchen anymore. Now we move on to Mansfield, Ohio. This place isn't just said to be haunted by, lame ghosts who will just pass right through your body if they ever try to punch you. It's also haunted by a big, scary, hairy, orange-eyed beast referred to as Orange Eyes, and you wouldn't want to get punched by Orange Eyes. But let's start with the haunted stuff. One of the most famous haunted locations in Mansfield is the Ohio State Reformatory, known for its imposing architecture and eerie atmosphere. Once a prison, the reformatory is said to be haunted by the spirits of former inmates who suffered under harsh conditions. Visitors have reported strange noises, apparitions, and unsettling feelings while exploring it. And aside from the reformatory, Mansfield is also home to, again, tales of a cryptid known as the Orange Eyes, described as a creature with glowing orange eyes and a menacing presence. Sightings of the Orange Eyes have been reported in the wooded areas surrounding the city. Some believe it to be a Bigfoot-like creature. Others think it could be paranormal in some way. Some even believe it to be extraterrestrial in origin. Next up, we have Boston, Boston Mills, aka Helltown. This is kind of like the Chernobyl of Ohio, so Helltown, Ohio, within the boundaries of Boston Township, is full, and I do mean full, of eerie legends and ghost stories. It was once a thriving community known as Boston Mills, but this area faced an abrupt evacuation in the early 70s at the hands of the US government, purportedly to establish the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Now, the empty homes, the abandoned buildings, and desolate streets that are left behind have this eerie vibe about them. You see, some locals insist that the evacuation wasn't solely because of the government's land claim. There are stories about much darker reasons. Apparently there was toxic contamination, with contaminants seeping into the soil. There are also stories about mutated animals and even people lingering around in the old abandoned homes. Not only that, but after the evacuation happened, there are said to have been satanic rituals carried out in the abandoned town. So, lots going on. Next up, we have Athens, Ohio, which has multiple haunted spots. There's a haunted abandoned asylum, a haunted cemetery, even the university is haunted. And there's more cemeteries which are also all haunted. Every place in this town has ghosts. Half the population who lives here aren't even alive. Now, the haunted reputation mostly comes from its history with the former Athens Lunatic Asylum, now known as the Ridges, which is actually part of Ohio University's campus. The asylum's grounds still have old cemeteries where former patients were buried. One of the creepiest stories about the asylum is the story of Margaret Schilling. She was a former resident who died in the attic in 1979, and she was left there for so long that her decomposing body left a stain on the floor that remains to this very day. Wilson Hall, a dorm on Ohio University's campus, is rumored to be built on top of an old cemetery. The fourth floor of Wilson Hall is said to be haunted, with reports of apparitions, strange noises, and slamming doors. There's also a rumor about a student who took their own life in one of the rooms there. In addition to the Ridges and Wilson Hall, several cemeteries in the Athens area are rumored to be haunted, including Sims, Haynes, Hanning, Cuckler, Higgins, Zion, Hunter, Slaughter, quite the name for a cemetery, Cutler, Mansfield, and Peach Ridge Cemetery. Some say these cemeteries are actually arranged in the shape of a pentagram, with Wilson Hall right at the center. Next, we have Kirtland, Ohio, which doesn't have much of a reputation of being haunted itself. What it does have, though, is a reputation for mutated creatures that are said to stalk the forests. Creatures known as melonheads. Deep within its dense forests are tales of the mysterious and eerie creatures known as the melonheads. According to local lore, the melonheads are said to be humanoid beings with these abnormally large, bulbous, hairless heads, resembling melons. I picture them kind of looking a bit like Hey Arnold, which would be a lot less cute in real life. These elusive creatures are rumored to lurk in the shadows of the forests, emerging only under cover of darkness to stalk unsuspecting travelers. Now, there are a few different versions of the melonhead's tale, but the most well-known story or explanation for these creatures was that a mad doctor was conducting unethical experiments on a bunch of orphans. Experiments which caused their bulbous craniums to take shape. At one point, the orphans got fed up with being experimented on, and they hated their melon bulbous dumb heads, and they banded together, killing the mad scientist before setting his home on fire and running off into the woods. Sightings and encounters of melon heads, though, continue to be reported to this day. Cleveland is also said to have some creepy paranormal stuff going on, mostly from the supposedly haunted Franklin Castle, which is said to be Ohio's most haunted house. The Franklin Castle is a towering structure with a dark and mysterious past. Built in the late 19th century, Franklin Castle has long been rumored to be haunted by restless spirits. Stories of tragedy, death, and mystery surround it. Legend has it that the castle's original owner, Haynes Tideman, suffered multiple personal losses within its walls, leading to rumors of curses and supernatural stuff going on. Pretty soon after his family moved in, Tideman's mother died. His sister then died of diabetes, and over the next 3 years, more and more of his siblings died prematurely. Only 2 of the 6 actually made it to adulthood, so it's really no wonder why the place is said to have some darkness lingering in it. Over the years, visitors and residents have reported strange sounds, apparitions, and unexplained phenomena within the castle. Despite renovations and changes in ownership, one thing has always stayed the same: the paranormal activity. Next up on the list is Put-in Bay, Bay. Now, Put-in-Bay, Ohio may be known for its sunny shores and summer fun, but lurking beneath the surface, there's some creepy stuff going on. From what I've read, there are 3 major haunted hotspots. First up, we have the Park Hotel. This hotel has stood since the late 1800s, and it's seen its fair share of guests come and go. Also means there's a lot of history, some of it dark. Some visitors have reported more than just creaky floorboards and old-fashioned charm. Rumor has it that the Park Hotel is haunted by the ghost of a young woman who tragically fell to her death from one of the upper floors. Guests have reported strange noises, flickering lights, and even sightings of a figure wandering the halls late at night. Next, there's the Dollar House, a Victorian mansion. Legend has it that the original owner, Valentine Dollar, was involved in some shady dealings during Prohibition, including smuggling alcohol and hiding it in secret passages throughout the house, and today visitors claim to hear whispers and footsteps echoing through the empty rooms, as if the ghosts of Dollar's past are still lingering within the walls. Then there's the Crow's Nest, a historic home that sits on a cliff overlooking Lake Erie. This mansion was once owned by Jay Cook, a banker and financier, but there's a tragic tale of one of Cook's daughters that's left its mark on the property. The story goes that the young girl fell to her death from one of the windows, and her ghost is said to still haunt the grounds, appearing as a fleeting figure in white. Moving on to Marietta, Ohio next, a charming town that also has its fair share of ghost stories, and most of the scary stuff happens at Hotel Lafayette. This hotel was built in the late 1800s. Over the years, guests and staff reported strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena while staying there, leading many to believe that the hotel is haunted by spirits. One of the most famous ghostly residents of the Hotel Lafayette is said to be a woman named Sarah, who reportedly took her own life in one of the rooms, and guests have reported hearing disembodied cries, footsteps, and even seeing apparitions wandering the halls late at night. Others have claimed to feel an eerie presence or sudden drops in temperature, but Sarah isn't the only ghost rumored to haunt the Hotel Lafayette. Some guests have reported encountering the spirit of a young girl who plays tricks on unsuspecting visitors by moving objects or flickering lights. A real brat of a ghost. But at least she's still having fun in the afterlife, so props to her. Next up, we have another kind of Chernobyl-like Ohio small town, Cheshire. Only a handful of people still call this place home. At one time, this was a bustling town, but barely anyone lives there at this point, and that's because of the environmental hazards caused by a nearby power plant. The plant emitted a thick, sooty residue and chemical fogs that would blanket the town sporadically. Obviously, not at all safe for residents to live in that kind of condition, so many abandoned their homes and started new lives in other places. Eventually, the power company responsible for the pollution was compelled to just buy out the entire town. But finally, we have the abandoned town of Moonville. Love that name, Moonville. This is a ghost town with only a few traces left behind, a cemetery, some foundations, and a desolate railroad tunnel. But what sets Moonville apart are the chilling tales that surround its abandoned tunnel, stories that have been passed down for decades. One of the most famous specters haunting Moonville is that of Theodore Lawhead, the unfortunate engineer whose spirit is said to roam the tracks. Back in the 1880s, Lawhead met a tragic end when his train collided head-on with another. Now visitors report sightings of a ghostly figure with a lantern in his hand pacing along the track and disappearing into the tunnel. Then there's the story of the Brakeman, a ghost believed to be that of a young man who met his demise after a night of heavy drinking. Legend has it that he fell asleep on the tracks, never to awaken again because he was too sauced to wake up before a train ran him over. Then there's the Lavender Lady. Some say they've seen a frail elderly woman walking near the tunnel only for her to vanish into thin air, leaving behind the lingering sense of lavender. Some say she's the spirit of Mary Shea or Shay, who met her end on those very tracks. There's also the spirit known as the Bully, believed to be the restless spirit of Baldy Keaton, a Moonville resident who liked a good old fist fight. The tale goes that after a scuffle at the saloon, Baldy was found dead on the tracks. As for how he died, no one knows for sure, but now his ghost is said to loom above the tunnel, glaring at unsuspecting visitors and even pelting them with stones.
Starting off, we are heading over to Canyon Lake. Canyon Lake was just a tranquil, gated community in California until it became the very dark backdrop for the heinous crimes of Dana Sue Gray. In a horrifying spree, Gray brutally attacked and took the lives of elderly women using their credit cards to fund lavish shopping trips. Her brutal acts, fueled by material greed, culminated in her arrest following a detailed description from a surviving victim. Gray's chilling case underscores a disturbing reality. Even the most serene towns can harbor sinister secrets, reminding us that evil knows no geographical bounds. Next up, we are heading over to Yuba City. On the surface, Juan Corona seemed like a regular man who was hired as a labor contractor at some fruit orchards in Yuba City, California. But what the residents didn't know is that things would very quickly take a dark turn. By establishing his own business, he became a crucial link between local farmers and seasonal laborers. But the tranquility of Yuba City was shattered in 1971 when farmer Goro Keiichiro discovered a suspicious, man-sized hole in his orchard, leading to a very grim discovery: multiple bodies buried in shallow graves bearing brutal marks of violence. Corona, previously linked to a violent crime and known for his troubled history, emerged as the prime suspect. His connection to the victims, evidenced by receipts and chilling ledgers, alongside potential tools found in his home, formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Despite an initial conviction being overturned, Corona was eventually sentenced to 25 life terms, marking him as one of America's most notorious serial killers at the time. His repeated parole requests have been uniformly denied, which I'm sure we can all breathe a sigh of relief for. Next up, we are heading over to Visalia. In the small town of Visalia, California, a series of burglaries, horrifying crimes, and even a killing known as the Visalia Ransacker incidents took place in the mid-1970s. But what if I told you that these crimes were solved decades later in a shocking twist? The perpetrator broke into homes, committed petty thefts, and escalated to violence, culminating in taking the life of Claude Snelling, a college professor trying to protect his daughter. These crimes terrorized the community and remained unsolved for decades until advancements in DNA technology linked them to a man, revealing the disturbing depth of his crimes across California. Many of you likely know the man who is most often referred to as the Golden State Killer. It is believed that these series of crimes in Visalia acted as a sort of training ground for the GSK before his later crime sprees that we are more familiar with. Next on our list today, we are heading over to Keddie, which is in Northern California. In the spring of 1979, Glenna Susan or Sue Sharp, seeking a fresh start after separating from her husband, moved with family to Northern California near to her brother. Initially residing in a trailer, the Sharp family later relocated to a more spacious home in Keddie, a quiet Sierra Nevada community. This tranquility was shattered on a grim morning in April 1981 when a horrifying scene was discovered in their home, plunging the town into a chilling mystery. Sue and 3 others were found deceased under brutal circumstances, prompting a very complex investigation involving local law enforcement and even the FBI. Amidst swirling rumors and a few solid leads, the case unfortunately grew cold, haunted by unanswered questions and the specter of injustice. The community of Keddie, enveloped in the shadow, would absolutely never be the same, and the Sharp family tragedy unfortunately remains unsolved. Next up on our list, we are moving over to Eureka. Eureka is usually like, wow, that's amazing. It's not right now, unfortunately. Eureka is a town in California, of course, and it is located on the shores of Humboldt Bay, but this beautiful coastal city was met with a very dark cloud back in 2014 when a local crime involving a priest rocked the town. The priest was sadly found in the rectory of his church, and authorities quickly knew that foul play was to be suspected. The feeling of the city changed after this crime as people were unsure of how to respond or who could possibly be responsible for such a horrific crime. This was all fueled by the fact of where this crime had taken place, in a place of worship where members of the community went to feel safe or feel taken care of, and it was now a place of unspeakable evil. After thorough investigations by local law enforcement, a suspect came to light, a man named Gary Lee Bullock, who had recently been released from jail just days before this crime took place. In the end, Gary was put on trial and found guilty for his crimes. While he had tried to plead an insanity case, the evidence proving that after the crimes he attempted to destroy the evidence proved that he knew what he had done was wrong, and he was sentenced to 2 life sentences. Next up on our list we have Placerville. Nestled in the heart of California's Gold Rush region, Placerville, once ominously dubbed Hangtown, holds a treasure trove of history mingled with spectral whispers from its boisterous past. This town, a pivotal site during a frenzied epoch of American history, proudly retains its architectural lineage, offering a tangible connection to the days when justice was often swift and harsh. As you stroll down its main thoroughfare enveloped by the echoes of yesteryears, you can't help but feel the palpable presence of the Old West. Places like the Hangman's Tree Saloon and the historic Carey House Hotel are not just remnants of history, they are places where some say the spirits of those who once tread these grounds linger, unwilling or unable to move on. Next on our list we are heading over to Felton. Picture this, a tranquil California town in the 70s. An era of peace and love suddenly becomes the place of a shocking event that shook the very foundation of the community. Enter John Linley Frazier, a man whose journey from a troubled youth to a convicted individual is as bewildering as it is tragic. Once a high school dropout from Santa Cruz County, Frazier spiraled into a deep obsession with apocalyptic prophecies and environmental zealotry, convincing himself that he was a chosen savior tasked with a very grim mission. On an unassuming day in October 1970, the serene mansion of Victor Ota, a well-respected ophthalmologist, became the scene of a very chilling act. Frazier, armed and determined, targeted Ota's family and their secretary, leaving a trail of sorrow in what was once a home filled with laughter and love. The perpetrator's manifesto, a very bizarre note left in an expensive car, hinted at a warped crusade against materialism, a tragic commentary on distorted ideals. While the case eventually saw justice, with Frazier sentenced and later found lifeless in his cell years later, the incident remains a very dark stain on the narrative of a town caught between its idyllic past and the harsh realities of a changing world. Next on our list today we have Covina, California. On a seemingly festive Christmas Eve in 2008, Covina, a town of course in California, became the home for a shocking and very tragic event. The Ortega family, known for their love of the holiday season, had gathered to celebrate, embracing the joy and togetherness that Christmas is known for. However, the night took an unimaginable turn when an individual dressed as Santa Claus arrived at their door. This was no ordinary holiday visitor. It was Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, who unleashed a horrifying sequence of violence, leading to the loss of 9 lives at the Ortega family gathering. He didn't just use firearms, he also employed a makeshift flamethrower, turning a scene of celebration into one of absolute devastation. Pardo's actions were not just a spree of violence, but a meticulously planned event rooted in a personal vendetta stemming from a recent divorce. Despite the meticulous planning, the night ended in Pardo's self-inflicted demise, adding a very grim conclusion to an already dark chapter. The incident left an indelible mark on the town of Covina, transforming a date meant for joy into a memory of loss and sorrow. Next up, in a much lighter turn of events, we are heading over to Idlewild, California. Nestled amidst the towering pines and rustic cabins, Idlewild serves up its own unique cocktail of natural beauty mingled with the mystique of the unknown. It's not just a haven for artists and hikers, but also a hotspot for those intrigued by the paranormal and the arcane. Imagine sitting by a crackling campfire, the air crisp with mountain chill, when suddenly the night is pierced by inexplicable lights dancing in the sky. Are they wayward campers, a trick of the light, or something more mysterious? Whispers of occult rituals in the surrounding woods only adds an extra layer of intrigue, painting Idlewild not just as a picturesque retreat, but as a place where the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary seems very thin. And finally, we are ending off our list today in Julian, California. In the serene town of Julian, known for its golden apples and rustic charm, there is a slice of mystery that rivals even its famed pies. As night falls over this quaint mountain retreat, some residents and visitors report witnessing mysterious lights weaving through the woods, an otherworldly spectacle that stirs curiosity and whispers of the unknown. Not only this, but a very peculiar phenomenon has been observed. Episodes of unexplained sleepwalking, where individuals are drawn towards the forest under a moonlit trance. These incidents, free from sinister undertones, paint Julian not just as a haven for pie enthusiasts and nature lovers, but also as a hotspot for those intrigued by the unexplained. It's a place where the ordinary meets the mysterious, adding an intriguing layer to this otherwise idyllic setting.
Pretty much every American in the audience knows exactly why this place is said to be one of the most haunted towns in the United States. Gettysburg is known for two things: its pivotal role in the American Civil War and its reputation as one of the most haunted places in the US, which those two basically go hand in hand. Back in July of 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg raged for 3 days, leaving behind a trail of devastation and death. It was one of the deadliest battles of the Civil War, with thousands of soldiers from both Union and Confederate armies losing their lives on the field. Now, fast forward to today, and you've got a town with a lot of history and a lot of ghost stories. People claim to have seen apparitions of soldiers wandering the battlefield, and then you also have all the stories about the sounds. Sounds of phantom gunfire and cannon blasts, or eerie drumming in the distance coming from nowhere. But the ghostly activity isn't just relegated to the battlefield. Many of the buildings in Gettysburg are said to be haunted as well. Hotels like the Farnsworth House Inn and the Gettysburg Hotel are rumored to have ghosts, and of course, some have said they've seen ghostly soldiers roaming the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Some say the sheer amount of death and suffering from that battle left a spiritual imprint, if you will, on the land, causing it to be a magnet for paranormal activity. Others think that the trauma and unfinished business of the soldiers who died there keeps them stuck between the world of the living and the dead, unable to find peace. Now we move on to Savannah, Georgia. Just like with Gettysburg, this town is well known for what went down during the Civil War, but there are lots of other dark parts about its past. Let's start with disease. Like many cities in the past, Savannah has faced outbreaks of deadly diseases, most famously yellow fever. Back in the day, the yellow fever swept through the city, taking countless lives. Then there were the fires. Savannah has experienced several devastating fires throughout its history, like the Great Savannah Fire of 1820, which destroyed a lot of the city's original buildings. And of course, there were the battles. Savannah played a big role in both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. A lot of important battles were fought here. Now, as for the hauntings themselves, well, they're everywhere. Savannah is filled with historic buildings and landmarks that are said to be haunted. Places like the Sorrel Weed House, Colonial Park Cemetery, and Moon River Brewing Company are all said to have ghosts and paranormal activity going on. Next, we have New Orleans. This is a town I've always wanted to go to. It's so full of history, so rich in culture, but part of that history is pretty dark and creepy. There are so many haunted spots, so many dark tales. We've done a whole video on haunted places in New Orleans alone. Definitely check that video out. But after this one, of course, a few heavy hitters are the Lalaurie Mansion, the former home of an evil French socialite named Delphine Lalaurie, who fled the city after it was discovered she'd tormented and mutilated several slaves she owned, performing twisted experiments on them. Pretty much every cemetery in New Orleans is said to be haunted as well, especially St. Louis Cemetery, and of course, you have all the history involving voodoo. Not saying the practice is evil by any means, but it does add to the general spookiness and vibe of the town. Next on the list, we have the town of St. Elmo. St. Elmo in Chaffee County, Colorado, now sits completely abandoned. But in its heyday, it was a bustling mining town filled with dreams of gold and silver. Founded in the late 1800s, St. Elmo was your standard town for the time. You had general stores, saloons, but as the mining started to dry up over the years, so did the town's population, and by the 1920s, it was practically a ghost town. And I say practically because it wasn't completely abandoned. Meet Annabelle Stark, better known as Dirty Annie, a woman who refused to leave St. Elmo. Alongside her brother Tony, who grappled with mental health issues, Annabelle was one of the last residents of the town, which, with each passing year and dwindling community, Tony's mental state started spiraling further into isolation-induced madness, often seen wandering the desolate streets lost in his own thoughts. The two were surrounded by decaying buildings and homes, but Annabelle was determined to cling to their family home and the memories that it held. And some say that as the town emptied, Annabelle and Tony were the sole inhabitants. And today, when you visit the ghost town, it's said you just might see the ghostly presence of Dirty Annie, still wandering the empty, moonlit streets, guarding the town from the afterlife. Next up, we have Bannack, Montana. This place might look like your average ghost town now, but back in the day, it was anything but ordinary. Founded in 1862 when gold was discovered in Grasshopper Creek, it quickly became the very definition of a Wild West town, attracting a whole lot of folks hoping to strike it rich. But where there's gold, there's usually trouble, and Bannack was no exception. The place was full of shootouts, stagecoach robberies. Just picture the type of place from old Western movies where one guy punches another guy in a saloon and then everyone in the whole place starts beating each other up for no apparent reason. The place was so corrupt and crime-filled that even the town's sheriff, Henry Plummer, was secretly leading a gang of outlaws. But folks in Bannack weren't about to sit back and let these outlaws run the show. They had enough of the lawlessness, so they formed what they called the Vigilance Committee. And one night they rounded up over 20 members of the gang, including Plummer himself, and strung them up. Didn't really solve the problem as more outlaws rolled in, but as the gold started to run out and people moved on to other mining opportunities, Bannack faded into history. And these days, it's a ghost town in every sense of the word. Over 60 historic buildings are still standing, and as you can probably guess, yes, the place is said to be haunted. And it just wouldn't feel right talking about towns in North America with dark histories without bringing up Salem, Massachusetts. This place has such a dark history behind it that just the name alone, Salem, is just ominous. It evokes these feelings in you. The Salem witch trials are one of the darkest chapters in American history, and part of what makes the whole conundrum so creepy is that it kind of popped up out of nowhere. Witch trials had been a thing for hundreds of years in Europe, but they'd started to wane at this point in the late 1600s. Some of these superstitious beliefs carried over with settlers in the States though, and when young girls in the village started acting strange, having fits, screaming and saying they were being tormented by witches, things quickly spiraled out of control. The accusations spread very fast, like wildfire, and soon dozens of people, mostly women, but also some men, were accused of being witches. People were just pointing fingers left and right, making baseless claims. Anyone who seemed just a little different or rubbed someone the wrong way could find themselves in serious trouble if they were accused of witchcraft. And how do you really prove someone is a witch? You don't. It was just people's word against each other's. And in the end, 19 people were hanged and some died while awaiting trial. It's one of the worst cases of mass hysteria and paranoia in history.
Shepherdstown, West Virginia, is arguably one of the most haunted places in America, according to those who have visited the town and experienced its dark, paranormal atmosphere. The town was actually formed long before America became a country. Well, 46 years at least, and it was originally named Mecklenburg, but that changed when Thomas Shepard obtained the land in 1734. It's considered a historic Civil War area, as just 3 miles up from the town, the Antietam Battle, the most gruesome battle of the Civil War, was fought. A hotel in the town is also home to some pretty dark deaths. In one instance, a man took his own life after losing a card game. In another, a young man was killed for winning. Both men are said to roam around the hotel, and many claim to hear the younger of the two crying out for his mother, as he did during his last living moments. But perhaps the most famous sighting in the town is that of a dark, shadowy figure that lurks in the clock tower after dark. Oh, and the bakery is also haunted, with almost anyone who enters it claiming to have felt the sensation of hands pushing up against them and hearing whispered conversations in the waiting area despite being completely alone.
Next on the list we have Dingus in Mingo County. Love that name, Dingus. This is a very small and remote community. There are under 2,000 residents, and one of the things that makes this place really interesting is that one of the only ways to access the town is through a mile-long, very narrow, one-lane tunnel, which can be aggravating at the best of times, I imagine, and very dangerous at the worst. But Dingus also has a pretty dark history. It was a railroad and mining town at one time, and it was one of the most lawless places in the state. Lawmen struggled to keep order, and shootouts between police and outlaws was pretty common. And one thing the residents did not take kindly to were outsiders, and a lot of this was racially motivated. It wasn't uncommon for immigrants to be met with armed townspeople at the other end of the tunnel who would use very aggressive methods to keep them away. A lot of dark things happened at Dingus Tunnel, not just from violence like this, but accidents as well, like train collisions. So, aside from all the dark history, it probably comes as no surprise that many locals claim the tunnel to be quite haunted.
Next up, we have the Weston Asylum. You know we had to have at least one asylum on our list. It's classic. Back in the mid-1800s, the town of Weston was home to the controversially named Transileni Lunatic Asylum. It was used to house and treat the mentally ill of the time. However, that pretty much meant anyone whose opinion opposed those in positions of authority, or women who sometimes cried. But I digress. While the exact number of deaths that occurred on the grounds remains unknown, local historian and state hospital expert Titus Swan has estimated the number to be in or above a 5-figure range, meaning that at least 10,000 people died in the hospital. So, like, no wonder this place is super haunted. I mean, I think we know what kind of torment went on in those places back in the day. Not only that, but this particular asylum was often overcrowded, meaning that even without what would today be considered gross misconduct, the living conditions were already pretty bleak. Today, those who enter the once abandoned building that has since been reopened to the public as a historic landmark have reported feeling a sense of extreme dread, seeing mysterious, shadowy figures roaming the halls, and hearing the disembodied, helpless screams of patients past.
Next up we have Sheep Squatch of Boone County. I'm kind of cheating here with this one, adding a whole county to the list. But the creature has been spotted all throughout the place, so I kind of had to. The Sheep Squatch, also sometimes referred to as the White Thing, is described as a large, woolly, furred monster with goat horns and razor-sharp teeth. Sightings of the creature started being reported in Boone throughout the 90s, beginning in '94, when 2 youngsters spotted the strange creature while playing in their yard. Now, what I find interesting about these reports is that the creature is always described as having white fur. Now, why do I find this interesting? Well, with Bigfoot sightings, there's usually a chance people could be misidentifying a bear, whereas here, like, what animal is there the size of a bear with white fur? Polar bears, but they're not really roaming around West Virginia. The creature was spotted again in 1995 by a couple driving down a road in Boone County. They spotted a large white-furred animal sitting in a ditch. They didn't know what it was, so they stopped to look. Then it raced towards them. They sped out of there, but found large scratch marks on their car once they made it back home.
If you're gonna do an asylum, you might as well do a prison, specifically the West Virginia Penitentiary located in the small town of Moundsville. The prison opened its doors in 1863 after West Virginia split from just Virginia, becoming its own state. During its 119-year operation, some pretty dark stuff went on inside of its walls, which earned the prison a spot on the United States Department of Justice's top 10 most violent correctional facilities list. The recreational area of the prison, located in the basement, often saw various forms of illegal activity, including assault, violation assault, substance abuse, and even killings. At any given time during the penitentiary's operation, between 600 and 700 inmates were held on the grounds, but even still the prison was highly overcrowded, with inmates often having to sleep on the floor. And over the years, the property saw almost 1,000 deaths. Many people believe that those who died within the prison never actually left. photographed. In fact, many visitors to the grounds have seen and even photographed the shadowy figure of a man that roams the halls. And the staff working on the premises of what is now a historical site have reported being accosted while on the job. Oh, and remember the basement? Many people have claimed to have heard screams coming from its depths, but most are far too scared to go down and check it out.
In the town of Princeton sits the Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Unless you live in Princeton, West Virginia, or are a paranormal enthusiast though, you've probably never heard of the place. It's not much of a tourist destination anymore because it's been abandoned since 1988. It's said that the park was built on cursed land, and that's not just because people have seen specters lingering around the park, it's because there were tragic deaths at the park, and the place was built on land with some pretty dark history. There was a massacre on this land back in 1785. The landowner, Mitchell Clay, had lost 2 of his sons to a Native American raiding party and sought revenge. He gathered up a bunch of locals and attacked them right back. Then, in 1926, a man named Conley Trigg Snidow Sr. decided the land would be a perfect spot for a theme park. Over the years, there were 2 drownings in the pool. The park was also closed for a time after a failed health inspection. Then a former employee of the park bought the land in 1988, but was forced to close it down again just a year later because of increased insurance rates. So not the best luck for this place, and now the old structures like the Ferris wheel and swing ride stand eerily unused, coated in rust and haunted by ghosts. So they say.
This next one is pretty sad, but also pretty remarkable. In 1897 in Greenbrier County, and I can do a county because James did a county, so if we go down together. Anyways, in 1897 in Greenbrier County, Zona Shu was found dead. A funeral was held and Zona was laid to rest, but she couldn't rest, and so Zona's spirit visited her mother and explained to her that she had not died in the way everyone assumed she had, but instead she had been killed by her husband, who had been routinely aggressive throughout their entire marriage. Upon learning this information, Zona's mother demanded that her daughter's body be dug up and re-examined. And sure enough, upon closer inspection, it became clear to the prosecutor that Zona's neck had been broken. Her husband was arrested for the crime, and the city even installed a plaque recognizing Zona's ghost's involvement in the conviction of her killer.
The town of Harper's Ferry is said to be teeming with paranormal activity. In fact, it's said to be the most haunted town in the state. Harper's Ferry played a big role in the Civil War, and a lot of both Union and Confederate soldiers died here. In September of 1862, an estimated 13,000 soldiers died at the Battle of Harper's Ferry. There were also a number of raids, one of which was led by John Brown, who's said to haunt the town to this day. Some also say that on some nights you can hear the ghostly sounds of drummers marching their way down High Street. And there's also the tale of Screaming Jenny. So Jenny had no family, no home. She lived in an abandoned storage shed by the Harper's Ferry Railroad. One fall night, Jenny sat huddled by a fire, and then a spark leapt up from the fire, landing on her clothes, which began to catch fire. She was too cold and weak to notice before it was too late. She started screaming and rushed down the train tracks for help. Now here's the thing, when you're on fire, your vision is kind of blocked by light already, so she did not see the 2 glowing lights of a train rushing right towards her, and she was flattened by the train. Ever since this incident, on particularly cold autumn nights, some say they can hear the sounds of screams coming from the train tracks. Conductors have even seen a glowing figure flailing in the night, only to vanish into thin air once the train gets up too close.
Next up, we have the Parkersburg North Bend Rail Trail. I'm not sure if that's a tongue twister or the title of an adult movie. But anyways, in the daytime the trail is quite lovely and pretty serene, a great place to go for picnics and lunch dates. However, I suppose if your lunch date is at a park, it's already a picnic. Anyways, you could also go for breakfast, but I wouldn't recommend you go at night. Why? Because it's haunted. Well, part of it is at least. Specifically, the 1,300 foot long tunnel that can be found along the trail aka Tunnel Number 19. It is said that a woman wearing a white dress walks mournfully around inside of its dark walls. The legend goes that she was a bride riding on a train with her groom when she was pushed off and died beside the tracks. People in the area have also reported having found human bones in abandoned houses nearby, but that's an entirely different mystery for another day.
And finally, we have the town of Grafton, which is famous for one of the strangest cryptids in the United States, the Grafton Monster, which was first spotted in 1964 by a reporter named Robert Cockrell. He described the creature as this large 7 to 9 foot tall beast with white skin and no visible head. He was driving home from work late at night when he spotted the creature in the middle of the road. They raced home, then gathered 2 of his friends to come back to the site to investigate. The creature was gone, but they claimed to have come across large footprints, and they also heard a strange, low, bellowing whistle sound in the distance. The next day, dozens of calls started coming into the local newspaper, with people reporting to have spotted a similar looking creature, and that's when Cockrell decided to write his article. Reports that the cryptid started dying out by the end of that summer in 1964, but there's still sporadic sightings here and there. Elmendorf, Texas was the home of Joe Ball, who committed a series of gruesome crimes in the 30s. So this is an absolutely insane case here. I'm sure viewers from Texas are very familiar with Joe Ball, but I'd never heard of this story, and I'm pretty surprised that it's not more well known. So Joe Ball was a serial killer. He has a couple interesting nicknames: the Butcher of Elmendorf and the Alligator Man, both of which fit. He fought in World War I, and when he returned to Texas, he started making money as a bootlegger. Then, when Prohibition ended, he opened a saloon. At the back, he built a pond where he kept 6 alligators. He'd often feed live cats and dogs to the gators, but that didn't satisfy him for long. Soon, women in the area started going missing, including his own wife. Now, in 1938, 2 county sheriffs arrived at his property to question him about several of these missing women, and Ball pulled out a pistol and took his own life. But a handyman of Joe's, Clifford Wheeler, told authorities about how he'd assisted Ball in disposing of the bodies of 2 women who he'd killed, feeding them to his alligators. It's believed Joe Ball may have taken the lives of at least 20 women.
Next up, we have a small town in Texas that was once home to a lesser known but incredibly gruesome serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, who claims to have killed over 3,000 individuals during his criminal career, which spanned from the 1960s all the way into the 1980s. Also known as the Confession Killer or Highway Stalker, Lee Lucas was born in Blacksford, Virginia, and at a young age lost his father to hypothermia, and so his mother was forced to raise him on her own. Clearly, Henry wasn't happy with this, as his mother was the first person he killed in 1960 in Michigan. He was sent to prison but only served 10 years due to overcrowding. And that's when he moved to Ringgold, Texas with his niece Frida Powell to work for a sick woman named Katie Rich, both of whom he would later kill. While he claimed to have ended the lives of thousands of individuals through restricting airways, impaling them with sharp objects, blunt force, and hit and runs, he was convicted of only 11 killings.
Texarkana is home to one of the creepiest cases in the state's history, the Texarkana Moonlight Killer case. So this case was heavy inspiration for slasher movies that would come years later, along with tons of urban legends. The killer literally wore a sack with holes cut out for his eyes and would attack innocent couples while their cars were parked in an area called Lover's Lane. It's about as classic as it gets. So the first attack happened on February 22nd, 1946. A young couple, Jimmy Hollisand and his girlfriend Mary Jean Larry, were attacked by a man with a pillowcase over his head carrying a firearm. Jimmy was pistol whipped and very injured, and Mary was attacked, but the 2 lived. Many of the other victims wouldn't be so lucky though. He would attack 6 other people, and it all happened in a period of 10 weeks. The assailant became known as the Phantom of Texarkana, and the case was never solved.
Regular hospitals are bad enough, but abandoned and haunted hospitals definitely take the cake, so of course we had to include at least one on today's list. The Yorktown Memorial Hospital, located in Yorktown, Texas, between San Antonio and the Gulf Coast. It was built in 1951 to house and treat those suffering from substance abuse. When the hospital was abandoned in 1980, the living residents and staff members exited the building. But what about those who died during their time in the hospital? Well, it's said that they still inhabit the premises to this day. And no, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 patients who died while under the hospital's care. I'm talking about thousands, over 2,000 to be exact. So really, it's no wonder the place is extremely haunted. Honestly, I'm surprised it didn't open up some kind of gateway to hell and land a spot on the list in our last video. Check it out if you'd like. Those who have entered the building have reported feeling a strange rotting sensation and claim that they can feel the tormented soul's energies in the walls. Not only that, but many people have said they've heard screams and disembodied voices while inside, as well as seeing strange floating lights in the hallways despite the fact that the building is ancient and has no electricity. If you've been, let me know your experience.
Now we move on to Kerrville, Texas with the case of Janine Jones, a nurse who also terrorized San Antonio. What an absolute creep this woman is. Yes, she is still alive. She took the lives of an estimated 60 young patients in her care between 1970 and 1982. She'd inject patients with a variety of substances that would cause cardiac arrest. She first started working as a licensed vocational nurse at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. But hospital staff started realizing that an abnormal amount of young patients were dying in Jones's care. Now, here's where things get really infuriating. An investigation could have been carried out right there and then, and things could have ended here. But the hospital didn't want any negative attention, and they certainly did not want to be sued. So instead of alerting authorities, they asked all of their current LVNs to resign and then rehired exclusively registered nurses to take control of the pediatric ICU. This meant that Jones could just move on and start working at another hospital, which she did. So more young patients died at her hands at a pediatrician's clinic in Kerrville. There, a doctor finally found she'd been accessing lethal amounts of succinylmethonium chloride. So in 1985, she was finally convicted and is now serving life in prison.
Circling right on back to Yorktown, it appears as though this particular town is home to not only an incredibly haunted hospital, but also an incredibly disturbing creature known as a Wendigo. Although the creature is best described in Algonquin folklore, which is Canadian for my Americans on this channel, many locals of the town claim to have seen one of the beasts. Many people have compared the Wendigo to a skinwalker, as it is tall and lanky and somewhat humanoid, but can shapeshift and has been known to devour human flesh. And when a Wendigo finds the body of a deceased hiker, it will often inhabit it, and then turn to killing those who attempt to come into contact with its human exterior. Many people also claim to have seen the demon take the form of animals and follow and stalk them throughout the area. Stay safe out there in Wendigo.
Speaking of creepy creatures, Texas is also home to an entity known as Goatman, who stalks the old Alton Bridge connecting Denton and Copper Canyon. So the tale traces back to a black goat farmer named Oscar Washburn, who'd moved his family near the bridge. And Washburn earned a reputation as a very reliable businessman and was nicknamed the Goatman by locals. He even hung a sign on Alton Bridge pointing towards his home, proudly declaring, "This way to the Goatman." But in 1938, members of the local government who had ties to the Ku Klux Klan kidnapped Washburn from his family. They took him to the bridge, hung a noose around his neck, and threw him over the side. When they looked down expecting to see him dead though, they found the noose completely empty. Now, locals warn that crossing the bridge at night without headlights, just as the Klansmen did, will summon the Goatman. People crossing the bridge will claim to spot ghostly figures, mysterious lights coming from the woods, and even physical encounters like being touched, grabbed, or having rocks thrown at them from some unseen force. Or of course a half-man, half-goat monster.
Next up, surprise surprise, it's another creepy hospital. Worley Hospital in Pampa, Texas. The institution was opened in 1928 but closed its doors in the 1970s due to lack of revenue. After 40 years of sitting abandoned, the building has become quite a talking point for the town's locals, who claim that it is haunted by patients who died within its walls during its 42 years of operation. After many townspeople people reported seeing a black silhouette in the window of the abandoned building, ghost hunters began to take interest. Those who have entered have been greeted with decrepit and decaying walls, ceilings, and floors that have been heavily vandalized, but it appears as though trespassers aren't the only ones to make their way through the empty halls of the once surgically specialized facility. Many of the patients who died within the building's walls, as well as a 25-year-old nurse who was poisoned while working at the hospital, are said to roam the grounds. People have reported seeing demonic creatures stalking them while exploring the floors of the hospitals, with the majority of the activity taking place on the 3rd floor, where surgeries would have been performed when the hospital was running. Oh, and the current owner of the grounds wants to renovate the building into a ministry. Coincidence? I do not think so.
League City, Texas is home to an area known as the Killing Fields. So there is an abnormally large list of people who have been found dead in this stretch of land surrounding Interstate Highway 45. And there are also a number of people who've gone missing from this area and have still yet to be found. And out of more than 30 cases, only a small handful have ever been solved. The place is such a hotspot for mysterious deaths that a task force, Operation HALT, was set up just to investigate these incidents alone. The first cases started cropping up in the 70s with the discovery of multiple bodies scattered throughout the area, and over the decades, law enforcement agencies have recovered the remains of numerous people, many of them young women. And it's not even clear if there's just one assailant responsible, a group, or if the area is just an ideal spot to kind of get rid of evidence. We really don't know. It's a complete mystery to this day.
And finally, we have a man with a thing for eyes. Stealing them, that is. It all started in the 1990s in a rural area of Dallas. Is it a town? Not really, but this case is pure evil, so listen up. During the 90s, SEX workers began turning up dead at an alarming rate, with one very striking thing in common. You guessed it, their eyes had been completely removed from their sockets. The killer was Charles Albright, also known as the Eyeball Killer. When he was young, Charles had quite the knack for taxidermy. He would stuff many animals a week, doing his best to make them look pristine, but there was one thing missing: eyes. His mother refused to buy glass eyes for the animals, and so instead Charles would use buttons. When he got a little older, he slept with an SEX worker, which led to him getting a transmitted infection. I feel like the pieces are starting to come together. His obsession with the eyes and his hatred for women of this certain profession grew exponentially over the years, and on December 13th of 1990 he took his first life. After violating the woman, he fired a projectile from a handheld weapon, execution style, into the back of her head and carefully removed the eyes of the victim with what has been described as surgical precision. Charles was convicted of 1 killing, but most likely committed at least 3. He was sentenced to death and was executed in August of 2020.